right, so we're on to Korea for international foods class. So let's get to it. For centuries, the Koreans have eaten the fruits of the sea, the field, and the mountain, okay, because these are geographically significant features of the Korean peninsula, right? And if we look, it is a peninsula, which means it's mostly surrounded by water, but it is connected to a landmass, okay? So the Yellow Sea and the Sea of Japan offer excellent fish and all types of seafood and seaweed, right? The lowlands produce excellent grains and vegetables, while the uplands grow marvelous fruits, nuts, apples, all this different types of tree fruit, stuff like that. Okay. Um, the mountains offer wild and cultivated mushrooms, roots, greens, lots of forageables, right? Things that you can go in and find that grow naturally without having to be farmed. Okay. A temperate climate makes for 4 distinct seasons in Korea, but the fall harvest is the most abundant. Through the centuries, the basic seasonings, which are red pepper, green onion, well, really Korean pepper, green onion, soy sauce, different types of fermented bean pastes, garlic, ginger, sesame, mustard, vinegar, have been combined in various ways to enhance the meat, fish, seafood, and vegetables, and in a particularly spicy way. Right? That's a definitely a Korean attribute to the food. Is lots of Korean pepper. Various regions of Korea have special seasoning combinations. Some are hotter, some are less spicy, and each family on top of that has its own particular seasoning pattern, right? One family might not use fish sauce in their kimchi, and the other one uses a ton. Okay, but both claim kimchi as an integral part of their daily diet. So kimchi is really a big part of what we're going to learn, just because it's a great tool for us to compare and contrast Korean food culture to other food cultures around the world. I'm going to explain it now, but we'll also talk about it more later in this lecture. Okay, so kimchi is a kind of spicy fermented pickle, and it accompanies basically every Korean meal. The base kimchi is made from cabbage. The one that you think of is made from cabbage, but it could be any type of vegetable, and it's usually seasoned with Korean pepper, garlic, onion, ginger, salt, fish sauce, sometimes fruit, and then it's fermented in an earthenware crock. Okay, so it's some type of thing made from earthenware, sealed. Some people bury it, and then it's fermented. Okay, kimchi is made in large quantities in late autumn for use during the winter months. Making kimchi in autumn is called kimjang, which is one of Korea's most important household events. All right, kimchi contains a good amount of vitamin C and stimulates the appetite. And when eaten with rice, it makes a really delicious flavor combination. It's very distinct, right? Kimchi and rice, you can just eat it by itself. It's so good. The basic Korean diet and meal includes steamed rice, always a hot soup. Korea is a massive soup culture, right? One of the most prolific soup cultures in the world. I don't think there's another culture that has more soups than Korea, right? They turn everything into a soup. They also have kimchi and then several meat or vegetable side dishes called banchan. And then after dinner is usually a fruit as an after meal refresher. But Korea, I would say a little bit more than Japan, does have a little bit of a bigger dessert culture. Okay. In season fresh vegetables are used at the peak of their season, or they're dried and preserved for season or for use out of their peak season. Okay. The Korean table setting. Now, this is an interesting one. They're classified into different categories called 3 chop, 5 chop, 7 chop, 9 chop, or 12 chop, which is relating to the amount of banchan, little side dishes that are present at the table. The more formal the meal is, for the most part, the more banchan there is there. Some people say a 12 chop, 12 side dish meal is used for royalty or something like that way back in the day. Korean food is usually shared by many diners. Each person has their own bowl of rice or soup, as either or together. But other dishes are set on the table for everybody to reach. The main dishes and side dishes are distinguished by the quantities served. Okay, so you will get like one big main dish and then a bunch of little banchan. And banchan is meant to be replenished during the meal, so you're supposed to eat it and then get more of it and keep eating it. Okay. As for the serving of the food, all the food except the hot soups are set at one time. on a low table, similar to what we talked about in Japan, where you sit to eat. Okay, in general, the Korean diet is high in grains and vegetables, which adds a lot of fiber to their diet. Moderate protein, right? Not a ton of protein, but moderate to adequate protein, both animal and vegetable proteins, right? And when we talk about vegetable proteins, we're talking about different legumes, tofu, those fermented soybean products, things like that. It's moderate in calories and usually low in fat and sugar. To be blunt, it's a pretty healthy, well balanced diet. We're going to talk about some of the ingredients used, and all this stuff is in your study guide. Some common or noteworthy ingredients. As far as proteins, things that I think are pretty specific to Korea, galbi, which is these cross-cut beef short ribs. They're known for cutting them across the bones like that with a bandsaw. Bulgogi, which is this beef sirloin strips, right? It can be marinated or not marinated. Pork belly, up here, thick slabs of pork belly you'll find a lot, and then pork jowl, right? The jowl of the pig is something that you see a lot in Korean cuisine. Obviously, there's a lot more to that. They're a peninsula, we said, so there's tons of seafood. It's a big shellfish culture. You see lots of squid, lots of shrimp, stuff like that. But these are the big meats that I can think of. Okay, vegetables. Um, the main things that we see as Americans in Korean food is radishes, Napa cabbage, which is used for kimchi, cucumber, sweet and starchy potatoes, bean sprouts, lots of different kinds of seaweed, summer squash and winter squash, right? So a summer squash would be something like a zucchini, and then a winter squash would be something like a kabocha squash or acorn squash, something like that. Summer squashes are tender, winter squashes are hard. Lots of mushrooms, and then it's another culture that uses lotus root. The starches, obviously, it's a big rice culture, but also the noodles are worth mentioning. The ones you see on the left right here are cellophane noodles made from sweet potato starch. That's a very Korean thing. Some people call it glass noodles. Also, naengmyeon, which you don't have here, but we'll talk about later, are cold, usually eaten cold, but they're made with buckwheat flour and arrowroot. Arrowroot is a pure starch thickener, so it makes a really thick, chewy noodle. And then Korean rice cakes, right? So I'll probably post a video of how to make these. They pulverize the rice after it's been soaked into a fine powder, and then they steam it, and then they'll pulverize it again after being steamed, and it makes this really chewy, delicious texture, very pleasurable mouthfeel. Okay, I think Korea is a culture that really enjoys chewy food, and the rice cakes are a big example of that. Here are the big ones, right? When we think of Korean food, I think of this stuff right here, right? Gochugaru, the Korean dried chili flake, right? It looks similar to crushed red pepper a little bit, the normal crushed red pepper we think of, but it has an amazingly bright color. Okay, Korean chili has a floral, but a mildly spicy flavor. So it's possible to use like a ton of it. Like you'll be surprised how much Korean chili powder I'm probably going to put into something this week during my cooking demo. You can put a lot of Korean chili powder in something and not completely ruin it. It's a great flavor. It's one of my favorite types of chili. Really bright color, really awesome floral flavor. The other two big things that you think of when you think of Korean flavoring ingredients are their fermented bean pastes, right? The one up top is doenjang. Again, it's in your study guide. Doenjang is regular fermented soybean paste. Usually there's some type of sugar in there, whether it's like a rice syrup or honey that helps the fermentation process. And you'll notice, unlike Japanese miso, doenjang has pieces of whole or cut up soybeans in there as well as the smooth paste. So it's kind of a mix. Really sweet, not really sweet, but it is sweet. Lots of umami. Great way to flavor a dish. The one below it is like my all-time favorite thing in Korean food, which is gochujang, right? It's a spicy fermented soybean paste. Okay, so you really think fermented soybeans, a little bit of sugar, something to aid the fermentation process, some type of salt, and then lots of Korean chili, right? Pretty spicy, a little sweet, tons of flavor. It's a great thing to flavor a base of some type of sauce or soup or marinade. Okay. Other things that you'll find are sesame oil. You use a lot of dried anchovies, types of rice wines, and then like the basic flavorings are soy sauce, rice vinegar, and mustard or mustard oil. Um, Obviously, not the type of mustard we think of, but uh, it does go really well with Korean food. And then basic aromatics, like if we're going super basic, we're talking ginger, garlic, and scallions. Okay, so some staple Korean dishes or meals. I think this is the one that all of us know, Korean barbecue. It's a family style meal of grilled meat served with rice, soup, tons of banchan, and kimchi, right? Each person is given a bowl of rice, and the table is set with many small dishes of banchan and kimchi. And then you get a plate of raw or marinated meat, which is brought to the table, and you grill it for yourself. Okay, it's over a communal grill, right? Too, so everyone's food is being grilled together, and we're all sharing it. The grilled meat is then either eaten over rice or with vegetables and condiments. Like you could have it over rice, or you could wrap it in a piece of pickled daikon and put some condiments in there. This it's a whole mix and match thing. Okay. Korean barbecue restaurants can range from extremely expensive high end establishments to really casual places where you bring your own meat and there's no seating. It's standing around a fire, right? Some Korean barbecue restaurants offer a massive array of meats and vegetables to grill, while others are known just for some specialized things. Really depends on where you go. Most Korean barbecue establishments use gas grills when we're talking about in America, right? But if you look in some of these pictures, other ones are heated by charcoal for a more robust flavor, right? So less common to find that in America unless maybe you're in LA where there's Koreatown, but far more likely to find that in actually Korea, obviously. Okay, so when we talk about Korea, I think the one thing that we should all be super aware of it is I said it before, it's a prolific soup culture. The greatest soup culture on earth, in my opinion. Okay. There's three big ones. The top one is the Korean seaweed soup. I think it's the out of the big three, it's the least known. I think these two soups are far more known. Doenjang jjigae, which is a Korean stew made with doenjang, that fermented soybean paste, right? Obviously, lots of tofu. You can find some seaweed in there sometimes, maybe some mushrooms, vegetables, really depending on what's in season, right? And then I would say the most known Korean soup, kimchi jjigae, right? Um, a lot of people actually use dashi for the base of this soup, whether it's just kombu and water, or some people put katsuobushi into it as well. So that's an interesting parallel between Korea and Japan. But the base is usually dashi, and then they have those big, powerful Korean ingredients to flavor it, like doenjang or kimchi, right? Super strong ingredients. There's tofu in there usually, and then in seasoned vegetables. Right. So again, there's almost an endless variety of Korean soups. These are the three most known, but I'm telling you, there's hundreds upon hundreds. Anything that Korean people eat, they can turn it into a soup. It's commendable, honestly. Um, I chose to highlight galbijim just because it's a braised dish, and I think it's probably the most commonly known one. And it was so important to Korean food that it was like one of the first things we learned in culinary school. So galbijim is a braised short rib dish that's eaten with rice. It's made with trimmed beef short ribs, right? You can tell it's not the cross-cut ones, but they're more conventionally cut the way that we would know them in the West. Uh, Soy sauce, sesame oil, scallions, garlic, pepper, ginger juice, and sugar are all mixed together with the ribs, and they're slowly simmered in a pot. Okay, when the meat's almost cooked, an additional seasoning is added of jujubes, which are Chinese dates, which is big in Korean food. Ginkgo nuts, which is something that you can find in Japanese cuisine as well. Carrots and pine nuts, and it's cooked again to really bring those flavors together. And near the end, usually When the meat is super tender, they'll add chestnuts and different types of mushrooms near the end of the cooking process. Okay, so that's galwegian. That's a braised short rib dish. Okay, so back to kimchi, right? Kimchi is more than just spicy red cabbage, okay? Any type of a large variety of Korean fermented vegetables are kimchi. Not all kimchi is cabbage, and it can be red or white. It can be with or without that Korean pepper. It can be made with any type of vegetable too. So if we're talking traditionally it's used with vegetables from the autumn harvest. But if we're talking right now, people make kimchi year round with all different types of stuff, with all different types of vegetables, with types of fruit. You can kimchiify just about anything, right? And it's the process of seasoning and fermenting a vegetable or any type of produce, okay? And I just wanted to show you there's a lot more than just the red cabbage, Napa cabbage kimchi. Banchan, okay? This is a collective name for many small side dishes that are served with rice in Korean cuisine. It's meant to be shared with everyone at the table and continually replenished during the meal, right? Again, traditionally, the more formal the meal is, the more banchan will be at the table. That's a very, I'm saying traditional, like that's an old thing, right? If you go to a Korean barbecue restaurant now, even a casual one could overload you with a bunch of different types of banchan. Um, Over the years, it's gotten more and more versatile to where, like, you look up here, you see potato salad. Um, you'll see marinated cuttlefish, marinated bean sprouts, pickled daikon, lots of different things. Not silken, tofu skin, broccoli, tons of different things. Banchan is endless. It's meant to be eaten with rice. Any meal that has rice can be served with banchan, and I'm telling you, it's again, this is one of the reasons why Korean food culture is one of my favorites because you don't get bored while you're at a Korean table. There's always a new flavor. There's always something that can spark up your taste buds at any point during the meal. I'm a big fan. So banchan's huge. Okay. Naengmyeon. So these are those buckwheat noodles I was talking about earlier. Okay. Naengmyeon, for the most part, is a cold noodle soup with very long and chewy noodles made from buckwheat and arrowroot, like I said before. The noodles are served in a large brass or steel bowl with a tangy, sometimes effervescent cold broth. So sometimes it can be so fermented in there, like you can put a really fermented kimchi juice in it that it can almost be a little carbonated. It's very refreshing. Some people even put carbonated liquids into it. Super refreshing, really meant to eat during super hot, humid days. You could have it anytime though. Traditional garnishes for naengmyeon or sliced cucumber and Asian pear, boiled egg and or meat, and then pickled radish, mustard or mustard oil. And again, don't think Heinz yellow mustard, think the actual spice itself. And then sometimes vinegar or kimchi juice. Okay. The noodles in there are so long and chewy that you need to cut them with scissors before consuming them. Scissors are a big thing in Japanese uh, cutlery, right? You use scissors to cut meat, to cut these noodles, to cut a lot of stuff, and it's honestly pretty convenient. But you can choke on these noodles if you don't cut them, because if you ever tried to eat this without cutting the noodles, you'll realize that the noodles are extremely long and they're super chewy, so you need to cut them before you eat them with scissors. That's the traditional way. Two main varieties. I'm generalizing a bit, but these are the two biggest one when I'm thinking of naengmyeon. There's mol naengmyeon, which is a cold broth that's usually made with beef or chicken. It's a protein based one, which you see on the left. For the most part, same garnishes, right? Asian pear, pickled radish, pickled daikon, and sliced cucumber, usually egg, some type of meat maybe. And then the other one is on the right, bibum naengmyeon. Bibum naengmyeon. Sorry, it's hard to say for me. Broth is made primarily from gochujang, right? So it can be served hot or cold. I've only ever had it cold, and again, super refreshing, nice and spicy, very flavorful. The one thing you should know about Korean food is it's extremely impactful with flavor. When we talk about Japanese food, it was delicate. It was really focused on like beauty and elegance, and it's not very heavily seasoned. Korean food is a flavor bomb, absolute flavor bomb. And it takes the best thing from the cultures around it, I really think. It takes the best from China, it takes the best from Japan, and then it's created its own thing from scratch with all these different types of Korean products, and it's just delicious. So naengmyeon, buckwheat noodles, cold, super chewy. Tteokbokki. So a stir-fried dish made with those rice cake noodles I was talking about. It's a proper popular street food dish as well as a popular just restaurant dish or a dish to make at home. It can be made spicy with gochujang or not spicy with a soy sauce base. Traditional garnishes for it include fish cakes, boiled eggs, scallions, and sesame seeds. But the one thing we should know about tteokbokki is that it has been extremely varied over the years. You can find any type of sauce or garnish in there now. It's something that has become super popular to kind of play around with, and it's one of the things that has become less traditional over time. Very, again, Koreans love chewy textures, super chewy. It really picks up the sauce or the flavoring components around it, and that's the big thing about it. So that's tteokbokki. Again, super delicious. Highly recommend. That is all we have. So I will post the study guide on Canvas. So look that up, and then we'll talk about it next week. And I'll post some fun videos and do a demo on Monday. So I'll see you soon.